Okay, so this is about My Last Duchess and how to write a top band essay. And please go and follow the social medias, and I've put them up at the top. So for Instagram, it's Empower Our One, and on Facebook, it's Empower Our Education. There's always a lot of information about what's going on, what kind of workshops, classes, all that type of thing on both of them. I think there's a TikTok page, and this is actually going on YouTube. So if you want to have a look at the YouTube video afterwards, if you miss anything, then feel free to do that and subscribe and follow and everything like that. So I thought we'd start with just a poem overview and why it's important to study poems such as My Last Duchess, because this is featured in both the Power and Conflict section of the exam board and the Love and Relationships one with AQA and EdXL, and it's actually featured in A-level on some exam boards. So it's definitely a poem that's really important to study.
Can you show us questions?
I am going to be showing you questions, yeah.
Can you show like exam style questions?
Yes, I've got those on the end. It's just an overview of what the poem's about, first of all, for anyone that might not have studied it in so much detail. So,
Can you send me the PowerPoint in email?
Yes, I can send everyone the PowerPoint in email and the exam question that we do at the end as well.
Okay.
Yeah, so My Last Duchess was written by Robert Browning in 1842, so quite a long time ago. And it's a dramatic monologue.
Excuse me, can I ask a question?
Pardon?
Can I ask a question, please?
Of course you can.
So, sorry if I distract you. I have some question from my English teacher that I'm struggling to answer, and if you could help me, that would be very useful.
Yeah, if you want to send me those on an email so that I can get back to you after we've done the workshop, then that'd be great, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. But yeah, it's a dramatic monologue, which means that it follows just one voice, which is the Duke of Ferrara, called Alfonso. Although we don't learn his name, that's just what it is. And it follows his voice throughout the entire poem, and it depicts the events going on in his life at the moment through his perspective. Like I said, it depicts the Duke discussing his previous...
You know, in the poem, does Browning speak himself?
No, it's all through the voice of the Duke, which is why it's a monologue. But yeah, it shows Duke? The Duke is Alfonso. He's kind of the ruler of Ferrara, like it says up here. But yeah, just for now, would it be okay if you put any questions into the chat box just so that I can answer them all at the end instead of having to kind of change what we're doing at the minute? Would that be okay?
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. No problem. Don't be sorry. But yeah, so because it's My Last Duchess, it depicts the Duke discussing his previous wife, or the wife that is the last Duchess, and he's discussing it with the servant of a family that he's planning on marrying into, and that's the perspective that the reader has. So as the reader, we're from this other family, we're a servant from another family, and in this family is another young girl that the Duke is now planning on making his next Duchess. So it's quite almost haunting that he's telling us about this past wife in such a powerful and controlling way to somebody that's going to be part of this new family that he's marrying into, which is why it's really important to discover this in the poem. And it was actually supposedly based on the real death of the Duchess of Ferrara, who died mysteriously, and there's said to be links to poison and things like that, so there is a bit of foul play going on, which makes it quite exciting in my opinion. I put a cheeky picture of Robert Browning in there, and that was meant to be the picture.
Can you explain that again, please?
Okay. Oh yeah, sure, I can explain that again. So
because I don't understand.
That's absolutely fine. So we're the servant. As a reader, we are the servant of, say, family Smith. We've got the big Smith and his daughter Carol Smith, and Carol Smith is going to marry the Duke of Ferrara, who is speaking to us, and we are the Smith's servant. And so we've gone off at like this party, whatever, and the Duke is explaining to me, oh, like my last wife did all of this, my last wife did all of that, knowing that his new wife is in the room next to him. So that's why it creates that kind of mysterious atmosphere of why is he telling us all of this, which is what we're going to discover later in the poem. So
the Duke is like a bit dumb.
Pardon?
The Duke is like a bit dumb.
It could be seen as stupid, but we're going to have a look at some of the other interpretations, because some people take it more as a power play, and some people just think he's being a bit stupid. But after we've read through the poem, we can have a look and see what we're all thinking. So
Oh.
I've done the painting in 2 halves. So this is the first half. That's My Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now, for our Pandulph's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Wilt please you sit and look at her, I said. Frau Pandulph hand by design, for never read, strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I've drawn for you, but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there, so, not the first, are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called the spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mandel laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought.
Is that translation?
Yes, I'm going to go through what it all means afterwards, don't worry.
Okay.
Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favourite her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bow of cherries summer fishes full. And that's the first half of the poem. I just thought we could go through this and make sure we all know what it means before moving on to the second half. So some key annotations where he calls, or what he's doing right now is there's a picture on the wall here of his last wife, and the reader is sat being forced to look at this picture as he explains it to her. So with the way he says that's my last Duchess, that already opens with that's a possessive. He uses the word my, which is a possessive
So
pronoun.
my means like is his wife, not any other people.
Yeah, it's even though she's dead, he still thinks of her as a possession. He's still hers, which kind of links into what the later things are. So when it says looking as if she were alive, that immediately gives the reader the evidence they need to make the inference that she's not alive anymore. Like looking as if she were alive means she's not alive. But this painting is so well done that it looks as though she is, which is also linked to Frau Pandolf, who at the time isn't actually real, but is meant to be this brilliant artist. So it's linked to how rich he is that he can afford this brilliant painting.
So the Duke talks about his old wife throughout the poem.
Yes, that's the whole poem. He's explaining his old wife that has died mysteriously. And he's saying to the reader, will you please sit and look at her? Which is very imperative. That's showing his power over the reader and over the servant by saying, you sit down and you will look at my wife. And like I said, Frau Pandolf is the famous painter that it would have been really expensive. Now this line's really interesting above it. Since none puts by the curtain I've drawn for you, but I, that means that there's this painting of this woman and there's a curtain over it. And the Duke can decide who sees his painting by pulling back the curtain and revealing this painting of his old wife to whoever he wishes. And the fact that he points out that it's like, but only I can do this, that is also another exertion of the power that he has. That's showing that he has the power to see who sees her, he has the power to stop people from seeing her. And it's very, very possessive again. The next thing I wanted to point out was, and now PowerPoint's going to break. Sorry. This happens every time. There we go. So then he's saying like, oh, now everyone asks me this. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only that called that spot of joy into the Duchess's cheek. By spot of joy, he's meaning like pink spots on your cheek, so blushing. And he's saying like, sir, wasn't it only you that can make somebody blush? So now we get a hint that maybe he thinks that he's not the only person that makes her blush. Who's
talking here?
It's still the Duke, but he's kind of saying, oh, and everyone would ask me, isn't it only you that can make her blush? Which is a sign of his jealousy that's starting to come in, because it's...
Why does he use sir?
Because he's speaking as if he was somebody else. He's speaking as if that's how somebody would address him, which in itself is a show that he thinks very highly of himself, thinking that people would always call him sir, but because he was a Duke, they probably would. But he's very aware of that. But yeah, it's being like, maybe as a reader, we start thinking, maybe it wasn't only him that could bring this spot of joy or make her blush. So we start to think about that. The next thing I wanted to point out was the fact that he says the half flush that dies along her throat, that's very intense imagery based on what's already happened, because to me it's kind of seemed like, oh, we're looking at a painting, this guy's a bit weird, he's a bit possessive, and he bangs in that word dies. That immediately changes the atmosphere of it. That half flush that dies along her throat. That's where I start finding this poem a lot darker than I have done before. And
what does that actually mean?
It's up for interpretation. When I first read it, I thought it meant like a half flush, like a blush, like kind of a redness that stops at her throat, like she's been suffocated or something like that. Or it just...
So like she's dead.
Yeah, kind of. And then the next thing I wanted to point out was she had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whatever she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. That's him saying, so, like, she has a heart that she was too easily impressed. She liked everything she looked at, and she liked to look at everything. Everyone impressed her. It wasn't just me that would make her impressed. She fancied everybody. Or in the Duke's interpretation, she fancied everybody, which is the important thing to know. It's not necessarily truth, it's his interpretation. And then moving on to the second half of the poem. Actually, if we take a look at this, the bough of cherry some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike
What's
the approving
mule?
speech. Pardon? Did you say what's a mule? A mule's, I think in this case, it's like a little donkey or a horse or something she could ride around a terrace. All and each would draw from her alike.
But how is that relevant?
It's just creating imagery. It's an image of her riding around the terrace with some other man in the Duke's mind. And all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-year-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such a one, and say, just this or that you disgust me, here you miss, or there exceed the mark, and if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, even then she would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whenever I pass her, but who passed without the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, and then all smiles stopped altogether. There she stays as if alive. Will you please rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warranty that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though this fair daughter's self, as I avowed, as starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Noted Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So a lot of people find this part a little bit confusing.
What is the effect of that exclamation?
We'll go through that as we get to it, if that's okay. But yeah, okay. A lot of people find this part quite confusing because he seems to just be going from topic to topic to topic, and none of them really seem to connect. But if we break it down, so up here, he's just kind of creating an image at the start of the second half. He's creating an image of her with like his old wife with another man, like going off into orchards, doing whatever, like she'd accept gifts from anybody, she'd spend time with anybody, that type of thing. And then it says, she thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-year-old name with anybody's gift. That kind of means that he doesn't believe that she is treating what he brings her with the same or with the right amount of respect. He thinks that he's
What do you mean? Can you explain that again?
Yeah, don't worry. I'll go over that again. So when he says my gift of a 900-year-old name, he is taking, because obviously he's come from a long line of dukes, he's taking that as meaning...
What do you mean by long line?
There's been a lot before him that were probably in the same family, so he's a descendant of that. So he's obviously in quite a high position of power, and he believes that she should take his gifts and thank his gifts more than someone that isn't.
So like the Duke is like upper class and the wife is middle class?
Kind of. Because the wife married him, she would also be upper class, but obviously other men aren't upper class as well. and he believes that he should receive more praise for being upper class than for those that are lower class. It's the whole thing to do with he thinks of himself very highly, and his ego is
So it's
very
like
damageable.
Mr. Berlin. So it's like Mr. Berlin.
Yeah, kind of like Mr. Burling. He thinks very, very highly of himself. Yeah. And then this is kind of all, we'll go through this in a second, but then at the end, he starts to speak about random artwork in his gallery, which I think is what throws a lot of people off, including me the first time I read it, is he's gone on about how,
Does
like,
not all this stuff like Neptune claws
yeah,
from GCSE.
noticed Neptune taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claws of Innsbruck cast in bronze to me. He's just speaking about a statue in his gallery where this painting of his old wife is. And that's why it's a bit confusing, because he just seems to go from this topic to this topic with absolutely no explanation. But we'll get to that as we've gone through the rest of it. So, like I explained, like blush, Elise, she thanked men. Good. That's what I was saying about he isn't saying that she shouldn't thank people, but he doesn't think that they should get the same thanks as him because he's so much higher class and in much more a position of authority.
So he thinks that he must get more thanks than other people.
Yeah, because he's of a higher class in his eyes, and because he is wealthy and can provide her with all of this when they can't. Yeah.
Oh.
Whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? So she's like, he's saying, yeah, she smiled whenever I went past her, but everybody else got that same smile. She treated everybody in the same way that she treated me, her husband, her Duke, the husband. So you're seeing at this point a lot of egotistical jealousy, a lot of self-pride that's really getting shattered because he's not being treated as if he is exceptional. It's like there's this lovely girl who's lovely to everybody, and he does not like that. So on the topic of the smiles, it said, this grew, I gave commands. What is he giving commands about? Which links on to the next line is, then all smiles stopped together. So he gave a command, and then she didn't smile at anybody. I definitely interpret that as he gave a command to maybe have her killed, and then she couldn't smile at anyone, which is a...
What do you mean?
As in, like I said up here, so she smiled no doubt whenever I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? As in, he was saying, like, even though she smiled at me, she smiled at everyone, and it was making him jealous that he wasn't the only one getting smiled at by her. And he was so fed up with this.
So the old wife didn't smile to the Duke, but smiled to other people.
No, the older wife did smile at the Duke, but she also smiled at other people. That would be like if you have a crush on someone in your class, and then they're really, really nice to you, but then they also are really, really nice to your friend and everybody else in the class. You're not going to feel as special because they treat everybody in that same lovely way. And to most people, that's just having nice manners. That's just being nice to people. But for the Duke, who has such a high ego and such an image that he feels he needs to portray, that's devastating for him. To him, that is like he's being disrespected, which is what makes him give these commands to make her stop smiling altogether or to kill her. And further down,
so that's why he kills her.
Yes, because he's jealous. So it's all about his ego and jealousy.
So the main theme is jealous.
Yes. Well done. And then what I find really interesting down here is as we know, he's speaking to us, the servant of this other family, and he actually speaks about his next possible wife to the servant here. Though this fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object, which I find really,
so now
really
he's
weird.
Thinking like the new wife is much more better than the old wife.
You could interpret it like that, but in my opinion, and in possibly other people's opinions as well, that is him going, well, he's explained to the servant how in control he wanted to be of his wife. It's clear that he didn't want a wife. He wanted somebody that he could own and that he could make do whatever he wants. He wanted a possession. And now describing this potential new wife as an object before he's even married her, to me, as the servant, like through the perspective of the servant, that would make me very, very worried, because it makes me feel like this woman is going to come to the exact same end as the last one, because who wants to be
Wait,
treated like
I'm
an
a bit
object.
confused. Can I explain it again, please?
Yeah, what bit would you like me to explain again? The object part?
Yeah, at starting it's my object.
Yeah, so it's just this whole bit.
So like
So
when
his
it says
fair daughters.
object is like when he. So when it says object, he starts to talk about his new wife.
Yes. He's saying that when I marry this new woman, she'll be my object. And I mean, at the time that was written it was written in 1842, but it was set in the 1600s rather. Oh dear. But yeah, so anyway, let's get started on the question because there's only 10 minutes left. So the essay question that I chose, also, I'm really sorry, but if you could put any questions in the chat for now, just because I don't have time to keep stopping because we're running out of time on the Zoom, then that'd be great. Thank you.
Or when are you finishing?
In about 10 minutes, just because Zoom shuts down after that. So just bang anything in the chat so I can go through this nice and quickly. And then you can send me any emails with questions afterwards as well. So the essay
Are you
question
going to
we're
go
going
online on Gmail?
Yes, you've got my email because I sent you the link to this.
Yeah.
Okay. So explore the ways in which Browning presents the theme of power in My Last Duchess. I got some of the AO. So AO1 is the kind of maintaining that critical style, being able to pick apart arguments that you're going to include in your question, being able to use quotes, and just being able to make points that go towards the question. That's all AO1 means. And AO2 is the kind of the analysing language and structure, being able to pick out, like it says here, relevant terminology. So things like repetition, structure, in this case, dramatic monologue, alliteration, all of that type of thing. And some points that I feel like we
Can you apply to this any of the poems?
Pardon?
Can I apply this to any of the poems?
Yes, literally all of the poems go after these ones as well. So some points to consider would be, in my opinion, his use of imperatives. So saying to the servant, will you please sit and look at her? That is a demonstration of his power because it shows that he believes he is in control of the situation. He has the power to be like, sit down, you're going to look at my dead wife now. That's one thing. Another thing would be the use of, I can never say this word, I'm really sorry, enjambment and caesura, which is the use of no punctuation at the end of lines before you go into the next one, or putting punctuation in the middle of lines instead of at the end. And I put the example of I call, and then there wasn't any punctuation, went on to the next line. That piece of wonder now. And that is kind of a demonstration of the Duke's ability to change the flow of the poem how he feels like it. He gets to manipulate how the poem sounds to the reader because of the punctuation that he uses and the pauses he takes. Another point would be the fact that it's a dramatic monologue, and obviously that's all one big stanza, there's no separate stanzas. That shows how unstoppable the Duke is and how only his voice is being heard. He's saying exactly what he wants. Nobody's interrupting him. He's just getting his point across. He's talking at you more than anything, which I'm doing with these, so maybe I'm like the Duke. But yeah.
Is Duke his real name?
No, his real name is Alfonso, but we don't know him as Alfonso. He's just the Duke to us. And I just highlighted some of the keywords, some imperatives, enjambment and caesura, and dramatic monologue. And some other points would be...
So for context, what do you have to know?
For context, if you just put this in the chat box, I'll respond to this later, just because we've only got about 6 minutes left and I'm running out onto the question. Sorry, but I will email you afterwards, don't worry. So other points to consider would be how controlling he is over his wife before her death and after her death. So with before, it'd be how he wanted only her presence, his presence rather, to make her blush. And afterwards, it would be the, I show you, I pull back the curtain and I can show you my wife, but she is only seen if I show her to you. So he wants to be the only person that has her attention. And there's also demonstration of his power and jealousy through ordering the death of his wife for being nice to other men. That is just such a big power play. Like, he didn't like the way she was acting, so he had her killed. That's one of the main points to make it a question about this. Okay, and I just highlighted this as well. So the way you'd lay out an essay, I really need to rush through this, sorry. So, introduction. It's meant to be short and concise. You just give an overview of the point you're going to make and kind of explain the question. and always use evaluative language, so words like intelligently, cleverly, successfully, to kind of show your opinion on how the writer is doing without being like, in my opinion. So, as an example, I wrote, My Last Duchess is a dramatic monologue written by Robert Browning and is a brilliant portrayal of power and control in poetry. Browning intelligently crafts the poem to involve subtle hints of the jealous and arrogant nature of the Duke in order to heighten the theme of power for the reader through his language and structural choices and the ideas of which he incorporates in his work. So it gives you a whole overview of what I'm going to be talking about, evaluative language with intelligently, and it just kind of gives an overview of what's going to be happening. Paragraph 1, all of your main body
paragraphs in the introduction.
That was the introduction, yeah.
No, in the introduction, can you put context?
Yes, you can do, but for this question we wouldn't need it, but because we're not doing a comparative question. And then paragraph 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, however many you're doing, all go with the P or Peel structure, whatever you've learned. You have to use quotes and again use evaluative language. As an example here, I wrote, one way in which Browning presents the theme of power is through the epic structure of the poem. The poem is a dramatic monologue, meaning that it is just the Duke's narrative throughout, which is a demonstration of his power, as only his voice and opinion is heard. This also signifies that the Duke is unstoppable in his nature, and there are no breaks to stanzas, representing the power and arrogant determination that he has. Not only does the dramatic monologue inform us about the Duke's powerful nature, but also skillfully shows the reader the self-importance and jealousy that the Duke acts with, without ever mentioning it, obviously, or outright mentioning it. Again, we've got the quotes in there. It's got a point, evidence, explain, and evaluative language skillfully up here. I only did 2 body paragraphs because it's the same. It would just be me writing out the points again and again and again, which I'm sure would get boring for you. But for the second point, I wrote, another way in which the theme of power is presented in the poem is through the interactions that the Duke has with the reader, who is listening to the Duke speak through the perspective of a servant. The Duke is seen to hold himself in high regard, and this is evident through the imperatives he uses when addressing the servant, telling us to sit and look after painting his wife, exerting that his power as being higher in the social hierarchy. As well as this, the Duke shows his power and control to the servant by telling him that, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you. The Duke is referring to the painting that he has revealed to the reader, demonstrating not only his power over the servant, but also his power over his wife, and who sees her even after her death. Again, obvious point, we've got the quote, then we've got the explanation. There's not any evaluative language in this one, I don't think, but we don't need that in every paragraph, just overall. And then, like I said, I didn't do tons of points, so the conclusion, just a quick overview of the points and make it concise but still quite clear. So I did a short one. Ultimately, Browning successfully presents the theme of power in My Last Duchess through his portrayal of the Duke as a controlling and jealous character, and his interactions with the reader and his late wife, as well as the epic structure of the dramatic monologue portraying him to be powerful and egotistical. And that was all I got for the PowerPoint. So I hope that was helpful and that anyone else that had any questions.
Can you